Who was Pericles? Born in Athens, Greece in 495 BCE, Pericles was an Athenian statesman and military leader who played a major role in developing Athens into the most prominent cultural center of ancient Greece and the ancient world. He lived in an era that, thanks to his accomplishments and his legislative, artistic, as well as military and diplomatic choices, came to be known as the Age of the Athenian Empire. I'm General Elias, and this is Historicity, a channel in which we keep a record of the constant call time, the good and the bad, in hopes of learning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. He was the son of Xanthippus, a member through his mother, Agariste, of the Alcmeonid clan, one of Athens' most prominent and rich families, a family that was closely related to Cleisthenes, the father of classical Greek democracy. It is said by Plutarch and Herodotus that days before his birth, his mother dreamt she was birthing a lion, an omen which many have interpreted as meaning that he would achieve greatness. Others, specifically and especially people during his day, have taken a more literal interpretation of the dream. They say it meant that he would have a big head, which according to the comedians of the era was the case, as they referred to him in several works as having a squeal head. And many theorize today that the reason all his busts depict him wearing a helmet is to hide the physical abnormality of the great Athenian leader, while at the same time celebrating his official rank as strategos or general. As a toddler, he survived the turbulent times of the First Persian War, and at the age of 15 witnessed the Battle of Salamis during the Second Persian War, in which Themistocles became the hero of Athens, and was later likely evacuated with his family from the city of Athens before this one was burned to the ground by the armies of Xerxes. As a young man, he received a splendid education. He was taught love of music and appreciation for the arts by Damon, was instructed in math by the theoretical physicist Zeno of Ilia, and learned philosophy from none other than Protagoras and Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras in particular, according to Plutarch, became a close friend and influenced him greatly. In 478 BCE, his father, Xanthippus, passed away, and Pericles, still a teenager of 17, inherited a massive fortune, which basically allowed him to do and spend on whatever he wanted. But being a conscious Athenian, one who had been taught wisdom by the best philosophers of his day, Pericles wisely spent most of it in the arts and making a name for himself in Athens. He even went as far as financing the debut and staging of the Persei, the Persians, by Achilles in 472 BCE, a Greek tragedy in which the defeat of Xerxes was dramatized and which was part of a trilogy of works focused on divine retribution on the main characters who suffer gruesome consequences for their shortcomings against the gods or those who were favored by the gods. This play also marked the beginning of Pericles' political life and career, as he looked at Themistocles, the great Greek general, in a favorable light against his opponents, the party of Cimon and Aristides, who had ostracized him after winning the Second Persian War, and most of whom were still in power in Athens at the time. The next time his name is recorded in ancient history, he is espousing an aggressive expansionist policy for Athens in 463 BCE. Pericles is mentioned as having prosecuted Cimon himself, the leading general and statesman of his day, for having neglected a chance to conquer Macedonia, a failure which would come back to haunt Athens and the rest of Greece many years down the road. Although Cimon was acquitted, the confrontation proved that Pericles would be a contentious political rival. Plutarch states that finding himself come short of his competitor in wealth and money, by which advantages the other, Cimon, was unable to take care of the poor, inviting every day someone or other of the citizens that was in want of supper, Pericles, thus outdone in popular arts, turned to the distribution of public monies and in short time had bought the people. In 461 BCE, the conflict between Pericles and Cimon would continue. Plutarch continues, when Aristides was now dead and Themistocles driven out, and Cimon was, for the most part, kept abroad by the expectations he made in parts out of Greece, Pericles, seeing things in his posture, now advanced and took his side, not with the rich and few, but with the many and poor, contrary to his natural bent, which was far from democratical. Pericles associated himself with EPHIALTES, who was the leader at the time of those who wanted to preserve Themistocles' democracy, the majority, the poor of Athens. When Cimon arrived back from his travels, him and his mentor EPHIALTES charged Cimon with corruption, claiming he had aided Spartan interests instead of those of Athens. They finally succeeded and had him ostracized from the city for 10 years, eliminating in that way the greatest political rival, the democratic reforms they wanted to implement and the will of the people had. Another major event would shake Athens that same year and would mark the beginning of Pericles' sudden yet suspicious rise to power. His mentor, EPHIALTES, was assassinated. Now he, Pericles alone, was the head of the Populist Democratic Party. His alone was the responsibility of translating the will of the people into political action and change for Athens. His alone was the leadership. And a leader they would soon need, for Sparta, jealous of Athens' increasing success as the head of the Delian League, felt Athens was becoming too powerful a rival and wanted to challenge its dominance. This led to the First Peloponnesian War. But in order to understand what led to the First Peloponnesian War, that infamous series of battles between Athens and Sparta, we have to go back in time a bit to the end of the Second Persian War in 480 BCE, a time when Athens and its allies throughout the Aegean, except for Sparta, formed the Delian League, a military alliance focused on keeping the threat of Persia at bay while avenging the wrongs suffered at the hands of Xerxes and his armies. The Delian League was a confederation of most Greek city-states who, afraid of the Persian threat, decided to form an alliance for their common defense. Members of the League had two choices. Either they contributed by providing men and weapons to the cost, or by paying taxes to a common fund which was stored in the island of Delos. Out of the 150 to 330 members of the League at its height, most chose to pay the taxes, and Athens chose to provide the military power. Over time, though, Athens' dominance over its neighbors and allies was overwhelming. If a member of the League wanted to stop paying taxes and instead provide military forces, Athens would dissuade them not to. And if a member wanted to leave the League altogether, Athens would force them to stay and continue contributing to the general funds by invading them, defeating them with their more robust military, and forcing them to tear down their protective walls, a sign that they wouldn't be a threat again to the union of the League. By 465 BCE, Athens' control of the League was unquestionable. It was no longer an alliance as much as an empire. Now, during these years, basically from 479 BCE to 461 BCE, there was relative peace with Sparta, which had formed a league of its own, the Peloponnesian League. This peace was in particular the result of diplomatic work of Cimon and Aristides, the leaders of Athens during this age. However, when Aristides died and Cimon was ostracized by Pericles, EPHIALTES, and the populist Democrats of Athens in 461 BCE for colluding with Sparta, to the point that they believed and had evidence that he was working more on behalf of Sparta than on behalf of Athens, the Spartans were not satisfied. For the next 15 years, from 460 BCE to 445 BCE, both city-states would fight what came to be known as the First Peloponnesian War, a war highlighted by frequent battles between their allied cities and often themselves. Pericles himself, as commander-in-chief, led the Athenian forces in a number of battles, but neither side could gain a significant advantage. At the same time, Athens was also fighting the Persians. In 454 BCE, Athens sent a military expedition into Egypt to help the king of Libya, who was fighting Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes and new ruler of the Persian Empire. This expedition proved to be horrendous for Athens, and the result caused a panic in the city-state, with the population fearing retribution at the hands of the Persians, while at the same time fighting a war against Sparta. In an unprecedented move, Pericles forced the Delian League to move the treasury from the island of Delos to Athens, in essence gaining control of the finances of the League as well as its security. 3 years later, Athens would pass a decree imposing Athenian coinage as the official currency of the League, in fact cementing an Athenian empire. Finally, in the year 451 BCE, the Peloponnesian War came to an ephemeral end when a 5-year truce was finally agreed upon by Cimon, who was allowed back into Athens from his exile and was allowed by Pericles to negotiate peace with his old allies on behalf of Athens. Cimon would die a year later in 450 BCE, but his peace treaty would be ratified again in 445 BCE with a 30-year version that marked the beginning of Athens' golden age and Pericles' unrestricted influence over Athens. During this time, Pericles, using the League's funds, financed the most amazing cultural projects Athens and Greece ever saw. He rebuilt the Acropolis to the highest standards of beauty, engineering, and mathematics. He commissioned works by the era's greatest sculptors, painters, and designers. And in 447 BCE, he started work on the building that would eventually be called the Parthenon. He also subsidized the arts like never before, going as far as to allow the poor to go and watch plays that were paid for by the state. Additionally, and this was his most important contribution to the Athenian government, he passed legislation to allow every man who participated in government to be paid for his labor, especially jurors, a move which made of Athens a more egalitarian democracy, as it allowed all men, whether rich or poor, to put government duties first without needing to abandon the responsibilities of providing for their families. The public projects and lavish expenditures did not come without criticism. Thucydides, not the historian, but a family member of the now deceased Cimon, opposed the morality of using the funds meant for the defense of the League in building projects that would only benefit Athens alone. Pericles argued that as long as the allies were protected by Athens, then Athens did not have to provide account for how it spent the money. The arguments between the two on these and other topics would rage on for years, until finally in 443 BCE, Pericles managed to ostracize Thucydides for 10 years, leaving Pericles finally completely unopposed to influence Athens as he wished. For the next 12 years, Athens enjoyed peace and prosperity like never before under the patronage of Pericles, their strategos. However, the old wounds of the past little by little flare back up again and inch Athens closer and closer to war with its longtime adversary, Sparta. In the spring of 431 BCE, a conflict arose between Athens and Corinth, an ally of Sparta. This was the cue that the king of Sparta, Archidamus II, was waiting for in order for him to invade and lay siege to Athens. With the approaching Spartan forces, Pericles ordered all Athenians to abandon the countryside and enter the city's walls, which were considered to be impenetrable. When the Spartans arrived, they found Attica empty, and its people safely stored within the walls of Athens. They also recognized the brilliance of the plan. Although the people were locked inside the city, Athens had a port, and Athens' navy, which was incredibly strong, was being employed by Pericles to make frequent attacks on city-states allied to Sparta to weaken their strength, while at the same time Sparta couldn't do anything to them. The port also guaranteed that Athens was always supplied with food and resources. But then, in the year 430 BCE, when the Athenian victory seemed within reach, tragedy struck. A plague broke out within the city walls, arriving through its ports and spreading quickly among the population. By the end of the year, 75 to 100,000 Athenians lay dead. Pericles himself was not untouched by the epidemic. First, his 2 sons would die of the plague in 429 BCE, and two months later, so would he. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell so that every time there's a new video, you can be immediately informed. Also, come on, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm General Elias, and this is history.